On today's show, I am joined by my friend Andrew Kelly of Peachtree Hoops to talk about the deadline because the trade deadline is coming on Thursday afternoon. No more time to waste. The Hawks are involved in all kinds of rumblings, roster construction, question marks, and much more. We'll get into all of it, all the fallout, and all the potential fake trades and all that fun stuff coming up.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1406 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening into Tuesday. In fact, I'm going to tell you what time we're recording this podcast because it's that time of year with the deadline. It's about 8 p.m. Eastern right now. And today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. Users can have 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On at PrizePicks. That is prizepicks.com, promo code Locked On. And with that, I am joined on today's podcast by my friend, let's just say fade trade connoisseur. However you want to say this, Andrew Kelly's here. Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on. Fun time of year.
I try not to bug you only this time of year, but it's probably the most appetizing time. You always have your head in this stuff. And look, we don't have a firm agenda on today's podcast. The Hawks do play on Tuesday. I wrote a little bit of a preview on my Patreon at patreon.com/BTRoll. Pretty interesting game against the Pelicans. We're not talking about that much today, unless you have hot takes about the Pelicans game, Andrew, because that'll be the only game between now and the deadline. And as a refresher for anyone listening to the podcast, the deadline is at 3 p.m. on Thursday, and the Hawks play a game after that, which is always interesting. But before we get into what's maybe going to happen and all the factors in play, I want to ask you a question to kind of set the tone a little bit here. And it's about the way the Hawks have been playing, generally speaking. They're a 500 team right now, exactly. I had kind of a weirdly viral tweet the other day about how 500 they are this season. And I wonder, does that impact what you'd want to do? Where's your mindset? Let's say, for instance, you are in charge of the Hawks within reason, within the constraints of what the Hawks are able to do. Are you looking to buy? Should they be buying? Should they be holding pat? It's a weird situation because we all agree, I think, that they should be better than this, but they're still 500 and it's February, and that kind of colors this entire thing.
Yeah, that's a good way to lead off. One of the things that I think is pretty interesting when you think about their record to this point is if you just dive into the numbers and you look at their starting lineup, just look at the starting lineup, nothing else other than that. Their 5-man group, they have a plus 13.5 differential per cleaning the glass at over 900 possessions, which is one of the best in the league. I thought that really impressed me. Obviously we thought going into the year that they had a very strong starting lineup and the depth would be their question, but they really do stack up among the league's best 5-man lineups. And 5-man data is always kind of perilous because it relies on smaller samples. It's worth pointing out that this is one of the higher samples you'll see for a 5-man unit. But even when you break it down into 2-man combinations for each of those players, all of them are positive in net rating. So I think it says a lot that the starting group generally does fit pretty well, and they're competitive when they have everybody healthy. But the key issue, as we've said, since the preseason, is just that the depth isn't really there. So for me, I think that it's pretty compelling as far as how the starting lineup is played and how they've looked recently. Since the beginning of the year, I think they're closer to 10 to 15 range in net rating. So they have perked up since then. The offense has been much better. So for me, I could be a buyer, but you're not cashing in a bunch of assets to do so. If you can add another quality player to the rotation, that's something I could be interested in at the right price. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it at this point.
Yeah, that's kind of where I am as well. I know Hawks, it's definitely fake trade season and people want movement, and that's part of the fun of this. And as much as I poke fun at fake trades, it can be fun, it can be entertaining. I get all that. It's also important to be within the constraints because part of my job is to be okay, what's kind of realistic here? And you can make up fake trades, and that's part of the fun again. But for instance, this year, one of the prominent hurdles is the luxury tax, right? We've kind of all heard this. I've been saying it since the summer. People have kind of come around to that reality recently. Barring a change, the Hawks do not want to go into the luxury tax this year. And that's a constraint on what they can actually do. There are guys who are probably, untouchable or at least close to it on this roster. There are things you have to operate within. But like you said, when their good players are playing and playing together, they've been really good. Even you mentioned the starters, and that's been their best lineup. Even if you go to the starters plus a Kongwu in place of Capella, which is by far their second most used lineup because Clint missed all that time, they're also really good. They're like +7 with that group. So like we kind of know the deal here. If you've been paying attention to the Hawks most of the season, is that when their key guys are there and they're really good. But as I've kept saying, and I think you agree, it's like you can't build a team that just assumes everyone's going to be healthy all the time. Like guys are going to get hurt. You're going to have guys that miss time, and the depth is a concern. And I think a lot of what we'll talk about today is like ways to maybe paper over the depth issues. You can't fix them in one, but like probably the most prominent, always maybe not most prominent, most frequently discussed recently is like a Justin Holiday upgrade. And that's like not a sexy move at all, but also that would give them like one more body that they kind of need because look, we kind of like everybody kind of likes their top 8. And you throw in Jalen Johnson as the 9th, it's a pretty solid 9, even if you have issues with certain guys, if you're not a fan of certain players, but you kind of need more than those guys available, particularly at certain spots. And I wonder, like, does it give you any hesitancy to buy knowing that it's, not going to be probably, I won't say definitely, but probably not going to be a finals team this year. Like, even if they buy, maybe they catch lightning in a bottle again. But my general thought is, and I wonder if you agree, like, I'm okay buying, but it shouldn't be buying just to buy like for the very, very, very short term. Like there's a way where you can get a rental that helps you for a small price. But let's just say I would not be trading first round pick or maybe even multiple picks for a rental. Like I'd be looking you got to look at least to next year because look, most of the season is over and you're 500 and that has to matter. Even if you don't believe it. And I don't believe it either. I think this team is better than that, but the results are the results. And like, you probably shouldn't be like pushing a lot of chips in for a 1-year sample size.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that you're buying high or anything or making maybe radical alterations to the roster at this point. But I do think there is some value in trying to improve the team. For one, the East just isn't that scary this year. I mean, you never know if you could catch fire at the right time and perhaps even win a playoff series. Like that's in the range of outcomes. So for me, thinking more big picture as well, they're getting closer to the final version of the team that they're going to have. After they made the DeJounte Murray trade and gave up the assets for that, they have him a trade that they're sort of married to, and they're probably going to have to pay a max deal for DeJounte in another year. You have Hunter's deal coming up. Congo will be extension eligible in the summer. So the cap they don't have any cap space. And when you look at the salary construction that they have, like they don't have a lot of flexibility. So in some ways, I think it could be valuable to try to buy just to try to build synergy and trust among the key players on the roster, guys that are going to be in the team for multiple years. Even if you think that, this could be a gap year, which is sort of how I've felt about it from the beginning. I think there's still value in trying to build habits and try to work towards next year, even if this year winning a playoff series or something like that isn't necessarily the goal. So if you can make an addition to the roster and get like a quality, 8th, 9th, kind of player that just can help you on nights where you have guys out or gives you another defensive option, something like that. I think it could be worth doing. You just don't want to pay a huge price for it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think it's important to keep in mind too, like what you said about building habits and building chemistry. And for as much as I have noted that the Hawks did kind of, I never say all in, they pushed a lot of chips in for Murray, but that was always going to take time. And I haven't loved how they've been utilized all the time. I know there's this elephant in the room that Hawks fans are kind of done with Nate. And I totally get that. And I've said, I don't think he's gonna be back next year. So things are going to change most likely. But I think just having those guys on the court together for more and more time, having Hunter develop, having, all of your big guys still around and healthy right now, knock on wood, having AJ Griffin getting more and more time and playing very well. Like, on one hand, they are kind of capped out, and I've made sure to drive that point home. Like, let's just say, for instance, if you wanted to do a John Collins trade to save money, that's not going to save you money in a salary cap world. It's going to save you money in a luxury tax world, which matters to this ownership group. But there's no path realistically to cap space, which is very different than luxury tax space. So this is kind of your team. And yeah, you have a first round pick to build with it. And I know the Hawks have been pretty hot with first rounders recently with AJ and Jalen, et cetera, but you can't just rely on hitting every single pick moving forward either. So this is kind of going to be the group unless you have a big trade. And look, maybe there's a way where they could do a blockbuster trade. I don't know if you have a fake trade in your holster that's more of a huge one, but I am going to assume based on what I've heard that the Hawks are not likely to do a massive trade. Like, I know KD is popular right now. And look, if KD was actually available to the Hawks, they should be calling and offering lots of stuff for him. This is awesome. But unless you've heard something that I have, Andrew, I'm going to kind of assume they're not going to do like the earth-shattering deal now. Maybe over the summer they change it up a little bit more, but I'm more in the practical world of like, the biggest trade, if they were to make one, is probably the long-awaited John Collins trade, because other than that, I don't really see like a big-time move happening.
Or Bogdanovic. I think he's another guy that you could reasonably see going out in the right package. But one thing that also kind of complicates things is it doesn't seem that there's a lot of sellers right now. Like there's just so many 500 teams, and with the play-in, I think a lot of teams could be persuaded that they can make a run at some point, and they're less likely to cash in their pieces. Like even a team like Toronto is still kind of deciding what they want to do with their guys, even as they're, outside the play-in picture at the moment. So it's hard to see who the sellers are going to be, which can make a radical type move like less likely to begin with. Collins obviously stands out as the guy that you could see the number one, big move that they can make is maybe dealing him. Bogdanovic, if you get the right kind of offer with the way he's looked this year, he has that, $18 million player option coming up in the offseason. That's something that this is a point that you've made, that they're basically at the luxury line as it is with just the core group of players. So that's one of those contracts that you kind of have circled as one that could get moved in order to avoid that next season, or at least get more optionality there. I think the single most likely guy to go, in my opinion, is just going to be Justin Holiday. I mean, when you think about it, he hasn't played. He is outside the rotation firmly, unless there's some sort of injury or a blowout or something like that. He's on an expiring contract. If Travis Link were the GM, I would be like 100% confident that he would get moved out just as a player-friendly sort of move, so he could go somewhere he could get minutes. But when you look at the type of money he's on, it's more movable than like a minimum type. It gives you more options than like a minimum type salary does. So he's really the guy that I think is the most likely to go out. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. And just in terms of like, it's always easier. Trades are never easy, but it's always easier to move a guy like that on the margins than it is to do a John Collins trade, because there are lots of John Collins trade options. We'll talk about some of them in a second. Bogey, same thing, but it's just an easier thing to do to not alter your team, because like Justin, while he's a valuable guy in the locker room, he's their oldest player. Nate likes him. Like that stuff does matter. He's not playing, like you said. He hasn't been playing really at all for about a month, and it's just easier to pull the trigger on something like that to make things without having to like shake the entire boat. I do want to get into some scenarios on all of these guys, but before we do that, we'll take a quick break here from our sponsors on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by Built Bar. If you're looking for a delicious treat this time of year, you don't want all the fat and calories, though, you have to check out a Built Bar right now. I know one of my goals this year is to eat a little bit healthier. It's always something that you want to do at this time of year, especially in the January, February corridor. And what you don't want to do is give up the taste to actually eat healthy and eat better. If that sounds like you, Built Bar is a fantastic option. With Built, healthy is tasty, and they're so delicious that you actually won't believe that they're actually good for you as well. They have 100% real chocolate. Yes, real chocolate on the outside of the bar, and they come in a ton of awesome flavors. My personal favorite is cookies and cream, of course, and you have tons of other options like coconut almond, peanut butter brownie, and more. And it's just like a candy bar, honestly. They have 130 calories, 4 grams of sugar, and a whopping 17 grams of protein. And you don't have to actually wait to get your Built Bars as well. For a long time, I've been telling you to order your Built Bars at Built.com. That is still an awesome option. I definitely encourage you to check out Built.com. But you can also get them right now at your local Sam's Club or Walmart. That's right. Walk into Walmart right now and grab a box of Built Bars. Or if you're closer to a Sam's Club, get a 13-bar box in a hurry at Sam's Club. Make sure to check out Built Bar right now and dive in today. All right, Andrew, let's go back to Justin Holiday, because it kind of dovetails with the only guy, I wonder if you noticed this too, the only player that the Hawks have been linked to from another team that is not directly associated with a Hawks trade. Like, that makes sense. Like, there's been lots of reporting out there about John Collins packages or even Bogdanovic packages in the media. The only player that I have seen reported in the last several months that have the Hawks being interested in that player without like a return attached is Matisse Thybulle. I talked about him a little bit earlier in the week when that reporting came out, and we won't spend too much time on this, but that's one of the examples of a Justin Holiday swap, most likely, because that'd be the way to match salary. We'll spend some time on him now, I guess. What did you make of the Thybulle interest? And then going beyond that, I'm sure you have a working list of players that you've circled in Justin Holiday swaps. And just for the record, every single one of these guys I would imagine that we talk about is going to be Holiday plus more, like either second-round picks or first-round picks.
Right.
Because Justin doesn't have a lot of value on the market other than just being expiring contracts. But what do you make of Thybulle, and who else is there out there for Justin Holiday?
I'm not a big Thybulle fan. When you think about the current iteration that we've seen of Justin Holiday, since he's been traded, since he arrived in Sacramento, he just has not been very good. I used to be a big fan of his game in Indy. He's like a good catch and shoot player, a good defender with pretty good size. But since then, it's just sort of deteriorated with him. I mean, mean, you sort of wonder at times with more minutes if he might get to more of a form, but it's hard to really be too optimistic about him. As far as Thibault, I mean, I think he can make sense in some ways just because you get those situations late in game when you have timeouts and you're in defensive lineups. He's someone that you could plug in there. I think he's probably a better player than this version of Justin Holiday. I don't think that's a reach at all. I think he probably is. And the thing that would just kind of give me pause is that the offensive game for him is just so poor. It makes it really hard to deploy him. You'd have to use him in lineups where you have it's like Bogey or AJ Griffin to try to offset that as much as possible. Teams can just ignore him from three. He's a very timid scorer as well, so that it really does make fitting him in difficult. It could be useful in those nights when you have one or two guys out, just because he's better than a marginal player. Like, one thing you could say about him is he's better than a marginal player. You know, he's not just a fringe NBA guy. He is an actual rotation player, albeit a lower end one. He's someone that you can give minutes to. One thing also that would kind of make me nervous is just that sometimes when you see these trades happen, guys can get sort of a honeymoon period with a new team and they can put together a good 15, 20 game stretch. And with him being a pending restricted free agent with an inexperienced front office, that's something where if he were to put together a decent run, I mean, that would be nice, but it might put them in a position where they might hand out a contract that, you know, they might regret later in the future. So that's another element that would give me pause with him. But I think he is like a viable 9th, 10th man. He's not someone that I'm particularly a fan of due to the offense, but there is, you know, some selective defensive situations where he could pay off, and he's, you know, at least an above replacement level player too. So there is some value there.
Yeah, I'm not a Tabo guy either, to be honest. I think the defense is valuable. I think he's an overrated defender too. That doesn't mean he's bad, but like there's this notion that he's like this incredibly game-changing defender that I've never really seen. Like, he's a good defender, don't get me wrong, but I've kind of argued he might be the worst offensive wing in the league that actually plays. Like, he's that bad.
He's up there.
It's bad. So he's a specialist, and like you said, he is better than what they have. Like, if they were to, let's just say, for example, swap Justin for Matisse Thybulle, he'd be their 10th best player. Maybe, I mean, unless you just love Aaron Holiday, he'd be, and that's fine. He would give you some more depth, but I wouldn't pay a lot to do that. The other guy on Philly's roster is Furkan Korkmaz, who actually, I guess, requested/demanded a trade earlier today. That was reported by Keith Pompey. I kind of like Korkmaz, actually. I'd rather have him than Thybulle in a lot of ways, but importantly for the Hawks, he's owed $5.4 million for next year, and I don't think the Hawks are going to love that. Maybe they will. Maybe they love him, but that'd be my only thing there. Is like, he fits into the Holiday slot very well, but if they're worried about the luxury tax for next year, he would add more money to the books.
I've always kind of liked him. I mean, he's clearly fallen out of favor in Philly, but there could be scenarios where if you end up dealing Bogey and you need to get a shooter back, someone like Korkmaz could be, you know, useful in another deal. But like you said, with the money he's owed next season, I don't think I'd be, you know, in a rush to take that on, just given where they are with their salary cap.
Yeah, that's just another name that was out there. Somebody asked me about him today because it got reported that he had asked for a trade, and like, I think if you could do Holiday in a second for Korkmaz, it would be fine with me. I just don't know if they're going to want to add that money. I'll leave it to you. Like, who else? The way that I talked about it before with Tyler and by myself as well is like, what you're probably looking for with Justin trades is like a second draft guy. Like, Matisse Thybulle still has rookie contract, and that's why he's making less money than Justin Holiday is. Like, the hilarious one is Cam Reddish, who's very available. And the Hawks are not going to do that, I don't think, because that would just be too weird. But like, that kind of player, like this distressed asset, Rui Hachimura was one where he obviously got traded already, but someone in that range, it's like a third or fourth year guy making, you know, between $4 and $6 million, who like is better than Justin, but not like long for his own team. There are other ways to do this as well, but like, I've tried to find guys that fit that description. And again, we're not reporting anything here. It's just like, this is the idea of Justin's the only, and I mean, it's the only salary on the roster that is between the guys who you are not going to move in this hypothetical and the guys who are on the minimum. Like, you could trade Vic Krejci, but he's making the minimum. Like, you can't match salary with that. Same thing with Frank Kaminsky. And between them is AJ, who they're not going to trade, and Jalen Johnson, who they don't want to trade. So basically, that's why we're centering on Justin. But like, do you have anybody else that you've even thought of as like a potential, you know, Justin plus a pick swap kind of guy?
You know, it's interesting because I knew this was going to come up, and I was going around and looking at salaries, and a lot of the guys that I tend to like are actually like cheaper than him. It's weird because someone like Thybulle, he's on the last year of his rookie deal. That's like you said, a second draft guys. That's generally more who fits with him salary wise, but there's just not a lot of intrigue. Reddish, like you said, is probably not going to
It's
happen.
hard.
Rui's
Yeah.
been moved, so it's hard to really find any other guys other than Thibault who really fits that sort of profile. But among guys that I would be interested in, I mean, they make less than Holiday, so you have to kind of figure out how you want to piece it together. But I don't think that this would be possible just because of the type of team that they have. But the number one guy that I would be interested in would be like a Najee Marshall from the Pelicans. He has been, floated out in trade rumors. But the thing is, like, the Pelicans, when they're fully healthy, like, they could win the West this year. They want to win the West this year, So they're a team where if they're selling him, then they're probably expecting a rotation caliber player back. They're probably not going to sell him for, Justin Holiday and a couple second round picks, that are going to be in the 50s. Like, that's not something that probably is going to interest them. But if there's one guy, that would probably be the top guy, I think, that could help them. Another guy that I think is interesting, and this is also about half the salary is Holiday, is KJ Martin for the Rockets. He's another guy that's kind of been lightly connected in trade rumors, really good at the rim. So I think that's something they could use at times. Somebody that can get to the rim and score there would be nice. He's got another cheap year after this year as well. So that would be useful for putting together the team for next season. So those two guys stand out to me. Jalen McDaniels from Charlotte's another kind of interesting name that's been mentioned in trade discussions. So some of those kind of guys, if you could throw in some light kind of draft capital, they're young too and cheap. So you could kind of see how they could fit in the roster for more than a year. But those are a few that stand out to me, especially Marshall. I just don't think that the Pelicans are going to want to deal him for, a sub replacement level rotation guy like Holiday.
Yeah, it's hard. Like you said before, part of the issue is the lack of sellers. Like there's only 5 or 6 teams that are like truly buried for this year that are selling. And you mentioned the Rockets and the Hornets are 2 of those teams, which make them very interesting. One advantage the Hawks do have is that they only have 14 guys on the roster. So if they wanted to do a 2-for-1 on a guy who makes less, for example, KJ Martin, if the Hawks wanted to get KJ Martin in one of these deals, they could also take, pick a player, Dacian Nix or Usman Garuba or Josh Christopher to make the money work.
Just kind of a fringe guy to make it work, right?
Or Boban. Like Boban is a throw-in. Like Boban makes $3.5 million, for instance. Like they could do a 2-for-1 and just to make the money work. And the Hawks are able to do that without cutting anyone. Like obviously they also could just cut Veet if they wanted to, or cut Frank. But it's just they have a little bit of flexibility there that could make it a little bit easier. But the overarching point is it is hard. And again, not to drive the point home too much, there's a whole lot of guys who make, between, $8 and $10 million that the Hawks would probably like to get their hands on, but that's where you get into luxury tax stuff because you have to fill out a roster. So yeah, you could get to that money by going Justin plus Kaminsky or Justin plus Veet, but then you have to fill that roster spot and then you have to stay below the luxury tax. And I say have to because that's an ownership thing, but they're not going to go over, I don't think. So that complicates matters as well. We spent a lot of time on Justin Holiday, but I figured it was worth talking about because it's one of those things where like nationally, no one's talking about that. But I think locally, Hawks fans have figured out probably because we're all telling them that Justin is like the easiest way to make an upgrade. It won't be an earth-shattering one. I don't think they're going to turn Justin into this awesome piece, but someone who can help their bench would be helpful.
Right. And there's also ways you can maybe combine him with another player to get to like a Crowder type salary or someone like that. But
he's in that range of guys from like 8 to 10 million. Like if they wanted to call and offer Justin and Veet for Crowder, obviously it would be pick compensation too, but that deal works, for instance.
I think you would miss Veet's bench celebrations though.
I would miss being on the bench. He's fantastic.
And to his credit, we won't spend more than 30 seconds talking about it, but he really does like stand out. If you're watching on TV, he's always the first guy off the bench. So that's what you like to see from a guy that's like on the fringe of the roster.
I think he knows the deal with all of that stuff. All right, we're going to pivot to the guys who are a little bit more prominent in nature, i.e. Collins, Bogdanovic, and those kind of things. But before we get to that, our last break on today's podcast. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. If you're looking for a DFS option this year, make sure you check out the award-winning app at PrizePicks. PrizePicks Daily Fantasy made easy. I love it, and I know that you will too. It is very easy to use. I've been playing at PrizePicks for a while now across sports, and it's really a lot of fun. It's kind of a breeze to operate as well. All you have to do is pick 2 to 6 players and actually choose whether they'll have more or less than a certain number of points or rebounds or assists or any other you're looking for, total yards in the NFL, receiving yards, etc., with Super Bowl upcoming in the near future. They offer numbers on all kinds of sports, NBA, NFL, of course, college basketball, NHL, MLB, PGA, soccer, esports, and more. And an entire entry can be done in just a minute or less. It's that easy and it's that quick. Plus, it's just you. I guess they projected numbers. They have safe and fast withdrawals at PrizePicks, and they're operating in more than 30 states, including Georgia, and they're also in Canada. Download the app right now at PrizePicks or go to PrizePicks.com to operate really however you want to do that, whatever is easier for you. And if you want to sign up to play Daily Fantasy Sports immediately, first-time users can have a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. Don't forget that promo code. It is Locked On. At sign up for instant deposit match up to $100. Check it all out now at PrizePicks. All right, Andrew, let's get to the main event here and talk about the more prominent guys who would actually be, rotation changers, because talking about Justin, one of the appeals there is not have to shake things up. If they were to trade John finally after all this time, or if they were to even trade Bogey, that would be a more prominent in-season change. This is a group of front office people that I know a little bit, of course, when it comes to Landry, and Kyle played here and I talked to him a lot when it was there, and the Nick Ressler dynamic is out there, and Tony is reactionary. We all talked about that, but I will be the first to admit that I don't have the same level of confidence in my own evaluation, of what these guys are going to do, because with Travis, even if I didn't know, I had an idea of what his record was and what his tendencies were as an executive. And that does not exist with Landry and Kyle and Nick Ressler. It's not the same thing. So I'm a little bit flying blind on this one, but clearly John Collins has been in these rumors for, I don't know, 2.5 years, 3 years now. It's been a long, long time. Bogey's been in a lot of rumors too. I think nationally John gets more attention, but a lot of the secondary reporting has been Bogdanovic is very available and he has some interest around the league too. So I know, just to be pull the curtain back a little bit, Andrew is a little bit lower on John Collins than I am. I think he can probably admit that on the record here. If he doesn't want to do that, that's fine. But just as a player and as an asset, but we all agree John is very available still, and I think it wouldn't surprise me if he got moved. But I'll just open this up by saying this: I'm not hearing the same urgency to move John Collins now that I have at certain times in the past. That could change between now and Thursday, but if you ask me if he's going to get moved or not, I kind of lean no now, which is not where I thought I'd be, honestly, a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I could easily change my mind on this, but I don't think he's going to be traded. If you asked me this in, at the start of the year, I probably would have leaned towards yes. I think he will, but just based on recent play and the way that this team has tended to operate, is that they have a short-term bias. If things are going well, then the vibes are good, then they're less likely to make a big roster-altering move. If you look at the reporting that's been out there, there was reported in the past that there was a deal on the table with the Western Conference team for Collins that was later nixed by ownership. Yep. And so we know that ownership has a very heavy hand in making the final decision of the roster. And when the team is playing well, they're just less inclined to make that kind of decision. So this, the way they've been playing lately, I don't think that they're going to trade him. Another aspect is that his value is probably the lowest it's been since his rookie year, I would say. I don't think his contract is a capital B bad contract, but when you combine, a $25 million average annual value contract with his worst shooting year that he's had, I think he's 24% from three. It makes it harder for teams to want to buy on that, especially after years of, dangling him has eroded their leverage. So if you sell now, you're basically selling at his lowest point. So we began the pod with that point that we made about how good the starting lineup has been. So even in spite of Collins' individual performance not being as strong, at least on the offensive end this year, the starting lineup as a whole has been very good. So you have to remember that when it comes to looking at possible deals for Collins. So I don't think that he's going to get moved, but if you can find some sort of deal where you're breaking that contract into two perhaps lesser players, but you get more flexibility, it's easier to move those kind of deals. It's easier to kind of tailor your team around that. That's something that you could look at. But if you look at that deal that was reported once in the past with Utah, where you're trading for Malik Beasley and Jared Vanderbilt and giving up a first, or at least that's what Ainge wanted, then I don't think you can do that. That's not that's not a good deal for me. So I just don't think the value is going to be there. If you end up with a good, at least a good vet replacement for him and some more flexibility, then that's something you could look at. But it's harder for me to see a Collins deal that makes sense right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't be eager to do it. I mean, there are deals that have come across, whether as proposals or fake trades, that I don't just reject out of hand. But I've said this many times, I've still yet to see a deal that I like for Collins that I think is realistic. It's just one of those things where they'd have to willingly take a step back, and they're not seemingly willing to do that. And there are arguments for and against it. I know I'm high on Collins, but like you said, you'd be selling low on him. I think at this point in time, I think he's not going to be this kind of shooter forever. Like there's just no evidence of that. I mean, maybe his finger's just broken beyond repair, but I don't believe he's that bad of a shooter. He's actually, is what it is.
Yeah, and the thing is there too is he's shooting well from the line and he's shooting well from mid range, like just on the finger point. So does it only affect him on threes? Like it's a weird thing. And back to his contract, I think that's just a very important variable. Is just if he is now a sub 30% shooter, then I think it is an overpay. But if he gets back to where his career averages is, with his recent uptick in defensive play this season as well, then that's a much more palatable deal.
Yeah, I think that. Sure. If you just assume that this is actually his 3-point shooting, it would certainly ding his value considerably. Even then, like I have to just say it to keep my bingo card going that, the cap is going up and the deal isn't quite as bad as people think it is, generally speaking. But you've talked about it before on Twitter and on here, I think at one point too, like they've also just handled this as badly as they could have. Like if they were going to trade John Collins, they should have traded him a long time ago. His value was higher, even over the summer. Like the deal that, you mentioned the Western Conference deal. I don't have it nailed down, so I don't have to kind of mention it before. I think I know what deal that was. And that is a return that I think would have been better than what they're going to get this time around if they trade him. Like his value has gone down in the market because they have just dangled him out there forever. Now you have this front office change, etc. And again, this is where I don't know the tendencies of Landry and company just yet. So maybe they're going to hold back. And even the mixed reporting in the last couple of days, like my guy Tony Jones from The Athletic, who covers the Jazz, reported today that they've been talking to the Hawks about Collins, but there's been nothing substantial, and that the Hawks are looking for a player that I'm going to quote Tony here, a player they think puts them in another tier in the East, end quote, if they're going to trade Collins. Like that's not going to happen. I mean, maybe it will, but I think that goes in the bucket of like a big deal that I don't see coming. That's more of a package thing because they're not going to trade Collins. I think even you agree with this as someone who's not as high on him as I am. They're not going to upgrade at the position player for player this year by trading John Collins. It's just not. There's no that deal's not really in existence. Like even if you're the biggest Jay Crowder guy in the world, okay, Jay Crowder hasn't played in 6 months and isn't better than John Collins. Like the appeal of trading John, if you want to see it that way, would be to break up your books, like you said before, to clean up your books long term and maybe get a pick out of it, or maybe just kind of retool on the fly. It's not to make you better now. So it's one of those weird things where I wish I knew the direction. I wish I knew the asking price because it's been kind of reported all over the place, like what the Hawks are asking for. The Ainge thing is very funny. It's very Danny Ainge, but the only thing that I'm pretty confident about is that the Hawks are not going to pay to get off of John Collins. I can see them doing
that's
the deal.
The worst thing. Yeah, that's the worst thing they could do. Yeah,
and they're not going to do that. I mean, if they do, then I will fillet them for it. There are deals where I won't love it, but like here's the example for Utah that we talked about before a couple times. But like the Malik Beasley, Jared Vanderbilt package has been floating out there quite a bit for multiple players, not just for Collins. Like Utah's offering that package to a lot of teams. Vanderbilt, I think, has a fake injury tonight. He's missing the game as we're speaking on Monday. That's been out there. Like, look, I don't love that package for John Collins, but at least understand it on some level. Malik Beasley from here, potent shooter. Jared Vanderbilt, pretty good player. And it also makes you cheaper. You save money. The Hawks want to save money. I don't love it, but I at least get it. There are deals like that are out there. Like if they just want to give off Collins and just get it over with once and for all, go ahead and do that. But that makes them worse. It just does.
It also seems like with some of the reporting that we've seen recently, like what you referenced from Tony, that they're trying to basically regain some leverage. Like we've seen the Amrick report that they've considerably backed down their price on Collins, and you don't like to see that get out in the public. So it could be that they're trying to, regain a little bit of leverage by leaking, by leaking that they're not, in a rush to move in, which makes sense. I mean, you could. With the way the starting lineup has played, you could conceivably just kick the can to the offseason. There'll be more teams then that, have a better idea of their cap situation and can be interested in Collins. He might have, a 20, get hot from 3 of the last 20 games or something like that, and that could help his value. Right now, it's very challenging unless you get back a certain type of player. If you get somebody that is a considerably better shooter at the 4, that doesn't need designated touches, they can kind of get theirs just on the perimeter, like a floor spacer type, who is also at least an average defender. That's the type of move where I think, you can see how that can make sense, especially in crunch time. But it's hard to find that type of player. I mean, it really is just Crowder. If you get Crowder like the version that he was last year, which is a huge wild card because he's like
Even
32,
then.
33 and hasn't played in almost a year. So you don't know what you're going to get from that. But that's really about the only player they could conceivably get where they might not get worse, in my opinion, if you get that version of him.
Yeah, and even then, like even if you're super high on Crowder, he's 32, he's an expiring contract who wants a new deal. And then you're also having to take back to make the money work some bad money, whether it's Dario Saric or Landry Shamet, or as the two options, like without going all the way down that rabbit hole, those are negative value contracts on multiple year deals. So like, yeah,
I think Saric might be expiring. Saric might be.
Oh yeah,
expiring.
no, I think he actually is. He was. I was doing the math on that wrong, but I think you might have to do both. I'm looking at it now. But no matter what, like I think actually that's what it is. You have to do both. I don't think that Crowder and Saric is enough, or maybe it isn't. If it's close, maybe it's like Crowder, Saric, or something else small. No matter what, you got to take some bad money back, and you know, it's not the worst thing in the world. Yeah, Sarge is expiring. Oh, his campaign is the guy who's not expiring in addition to Landry Shamet.
And that just highlights how it's harder to find a deal, with a $25 million guy in the middle of the season. Like there's not a lot of teams that, most teams aren't trying to give up like 3 rotation players at this point in the season to take him on or something. You get more options in the offseason.
It's especially to bring it all full circle. Like I think they need to be willing. If they are not willing to do this, then mistakes have been made. Even if they kind of have decided long term they kind of want to move John, it would be better in my mind for them to wait until the offseason. That opens up so many more teams. It opens up more offers, flexibility. You have more information on guys on your roster. You have another third of a season on Bogey, for instance, and health wise. We'll come back to him in a second as well. You got more information on Jalen Johnson for your future, on Hunter, etc. And like I think that's part of this too, is that there's been a movement of Hawks fans that are like ready for Jalen to be the guy at the 4. That's a little bit premature. I like Jalen a lot, but like you don't know yet that he is going to be your power forward of the future. With Griffin, I think you have more confidence that he's going to be a guy for you as a starting wing long term. I'm not quite there on Jalen, although he might be that. No question about that. But like even more information on those guys would be part of the calculus too, in addition to just like building John's market back up. And once you get to the summer, there's just more flexibility for everybody, both internally and externally. Because like the one thing I will say, as we kind of look a little bit long term, is the Hawks are already being at the luxury tax line for next year. It's just a reality check that like I think somebody in the top 8 or 9 guys is going to get moved between now and like the middle of July. That's not really a sexy take, but like whether it is one of the centers or whether it's Collins or whether it's Bogdanovic, I cannot see them. I shouldn't say cannot. I don't think that they're going to go into next season with the same top 9 that they had this year. That's like my only take, and it's not a very strong take, but like just because this same top 9 plus a first round pick and whatever else is a tax team, and like they're not going to do that. I don't think, at least for the same team, unless they make a conference finals run or something like that. If they go crazy again and make the conference finals, maybe they do it and just pay the tax and pay the piper. But that kind of is part of this too. Is like they either have to do it now, or they have to do it later with someone like Collins or Bogey. But like you and I talked about this before offline and online, the center choice is not going to go away either. Probably not now in the next 3 days. But like, are they really going to go into a 4th season with Capella and Okongwu on the team? Maybe they will. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And it's at least worth pointing out too that with Okongwu's recent play, it is like a more imaginable now that you might find a deal for Capella in the offseason if you get like a decent offer with the way he's been playing lately. Whereas, a couple months ago, I thought, well, I think you're setting up for another year of that. But yeah, it's hard to imagine that they bring back all, 4 or all 3 rather of Capella and Collins and Bogdanovic. Like they're just not going to do that. And also you just have to look at just the allocation, what they're spending there. Are they getting a good ROI for that much? With Bogdanovic at his level right now, you have to really wonder. I mean, we've seen him come back from the dead before. Like this time last offseason, I thought, man, he's had the knee surgery. He's not going to play any better. And then after the All-Star break over the last, 20 or so games of the season, he was an important part of their, improvement over that period. So it's hard to completely write him off. But it's also hard to see him as a guy that's going to be on the roster as like a long-term piece as well. But it's interesting.
It is for sure. And to kind of talk through Bogey as the last like prominent guy, because again, there's no real point in talking about other guys. Like I think there are the borderline untouchables when it comes to Trey, DeJounte, and I think you throw AJ Griffin in there now as a guy the Hawks are not going to try to move in the near future. DeAndre Hunter is a difficult to trade guy. Also, they like him. At least Travis did. I think the front office still likes him, and he's on the poison pill, so you can move him, but it's not likely, and it's very difficult to do. And then you get into Clint and Okongwu, and it's just not really worth talking about those guys right now. But Bogey is. So it's $18 million this year, $18 million player option next year. I'm not sure if he's going to opt in or out, to be honest. Like if he's healthy at the end of the season, I can see him opting out. That's at least possible. But also, he's not been fantastic this year. He's limited physically, etc. Defensively, it's worse than it's ever been for Bogey because of his leg, basically. And then you throw in the emergence of Griffin, and that I think long term is going to matter to Bogey. On the other hand, we saw what it looked like with the Hawks in the first half of the season when he wasn't playing, that the shooting just was not enough. They just don't have enough guys. Even with Griffin's emergence, they don't have enough shooting on the roster without Bogey. So it's kind of a weird situation, and I think he does have some value. I think if they wanted to trade Bogey for at least neutral value, they could do it. I don't know if they want to, but I'm not sure if you've been racking your brain on Bogey destinations, but I think contenders in particular would probably like to get Bogey. Whereas Collins is more of like a maybe future-facing thing, like an Indiana or something like that, like a sleeper-ish team for the future. With Bogey, it's like which playoff team wants him is the question. Because I can't imagine a non-playoff team trading for him like actively.
I think it's also something where if you're not watching him like every night, he might be higher just because of his reputation around the league. And if you've caught him on the nights where he's super hot, like I think contenders tend to like Bogey. And that's also why I think there is a risk that not necessarily a risk, but he could opt out at the end of the season just because a good team might be willing to give up, a multi-year deal for him that would take him through his 30s. So I think that's in play. But the defense is just tough. And for me, when people talk about the deadline, if they're going to be buyers, the thing that really jumps out to me is just that their fourth quarter units need some overhauling. If you look at how they played this year, they've given up more double-digit leads than all but a few teams. I think the only teams that have, more have been, like teams like the Rockets and teams like that. And then they have really poor fourth quarter stats. And some of that, I just think that they have trouble putting together a good clutch lineup. Like with the erosion of Collins' shot, it makes it harder to use him offensively in the last 3 minutes of a game just because teams don't have to close out as hard on him. And when you have the kind of fourth quarter offense they have, trying to go isolation a lot, like that's just how they're going to play under McMillan for better or worse. Like I don't see that changing. So the best thing you can do if you're committed to that is to try to create as much spacing as possible. And Collins is just sort of a drag on that just because he doesn't have the confidence with the shot anymore. I mean, he still gets them up all right, but it's tough at the late stages of the game. And so your other option for Collins is Bogdanovic, but if you swap them out, then you're taking a huge defensive downgrade. And Collins still has a lot of value there. So you don't really have a guy that's, not taking something off the table on one end of the floor. So if there's a guy that they can get at the deadline, I'd be interested in someone that they could use as a potential closing unit guy, like somebody that's okay defensively, or at least better than Bogdanovic and at least a better shooter than Collins. It's not easy to find, a guy that's, average at both of those. But when you look at, how poor Bogey's been on D and how poor Collins has been as a shooter, I think it's not, unattainable to find a player like that. I mean, I think Crowder is definitely the guy that, the light bulbs go off is like the most likely guy that could fit that sort of role. But somebody that could have utility in a closing lineup is who I'd really be looking for at the deadline if they think they want to be buyers.
Yeah, if they want to do that, I would generally agree with that. And the one thing about Bogey that's a great point, I'm glad you said it, was because, he has a reputation, and I think an earned reputation as like a gamer. Like Bogey plays hard, he's physical, and yes, we've seen him play every minute of the season, and like you can tell his defense has definitely slipped. His knee is not probably the best, but he has been playing now without an incident for, knock on wood, a few months. And his offense, like everyone trusts. I know that Hawks fans would like to see more of AJ over him most nights. I get a lot of those tweets during the season, but like Bogey's still a guy that is valuable around the league. He gets guarded like a great shooter because he is one. And even in kind of a down season, he's shooting 37% from three on real volume. And like, if you put him in a situation where he's the only guy on the floor that's a bad defender, like it's a lot easier to work around that. The Hawks can't really do that because they have Trey and, DeJounte has his pluses and minuses, playing with Griffin or whatever. But I think Bogey would have value if they wanted to move him. And I can't get a read on that even more than Collins, I think, at this point, because like I've heard so much about Collins the last couple of years. But with Bogey, there's always a little bit of a background, like, okay, Bogey's available for the right price, but I don't know what they'd even be looking for. I think what you said makes sense. And like, there are guys you could get for Bogey. Going back to the Malik Beasley thing before about from Collins, like what you don't want to do is replace Bogey with a guy who's just like Bogey. I don't think like a sharpshooter who's a bad defender like that. You kind of already know what that looks like. Just hang on a Bogey at that point. But the knee is questionable. They know more about it than everybody else does. And the defense, I think they're probably hoping it comes back a little bit. But even when he was even pre-knee stuff, he's always been better as a physical player defensively than a quickness guy, and that's only gotten more magnified. So I certainly think his reputation is such where it wouldn't be the worst idea to go ahead and trade him right now. But but you also don't want to just give him away. Like you want to get some real value because Bogey. I know there's some frustration again from Hawks fans, but Bogey's still a very valuable player. Like he has a lot of positive appeal despite his shortcomings.
Right. For me, I think that if you do trade him, some sort of deal with Phoenix where you get Crowder back would basically be what I'd be looking for.
Phoenix, I kind of like that too. By the way, I'm not the biggest Crowder guy. I will say that. But if you're doing it without trading Collins, I like that a lot more. Like if you could turn Bogey into Crowder and whatever else, whether it be Saric or Shamet, that actually is interesting to me. And now you made this point earlier about somebody else, but I would be worried about Crowder's next deal if I was the Hawks. But as a rental, or maybe just because they're worried about Bogey's player option, I would not hate that idea.
Yeah, to get back a better defender and someone that you could use in your closing lineups, I think could have a lot of value. They're still taking a step back with the shooting there, which concerns me a little bit. But I do think if you're getting
Crowder will shoot though.
He's a volume shooter. He can play the 3 and the 4. He's a veteran. I think that getting someone with his personality could have value as some of the recurrent locker room issues they have. He could be useful there. That's somebody that I would be looking at. And for Phoenix, they could really use another creator, somebody that's not dependent on just creation from Booker and Paul would really help them. If he could get physically right, he's someone that could help them in a playoff run. So Crowder for Phoenix is a type of deal I'd be interested in for Bogey. I mean, you mentioned Malik Beasley. I mean, he's not a good defender, but I just think he's more physically reliable than Bogey is. He's younger. Yeah. I would have some interest in him. I mean, he's an excellent movement shooter, a volume guy, can score at the rim as well. Like I'd be kind of interested in him at the right price. But I don't know that.
I would be too, by the way. Like I'm not that I'm crossing him off. It's just the fact that if you're Utah, it doesn't do them any good to trade for Bogey. Like I think that they only do a Beasley trade if it's for Collins and they're looking more long term. Yeah. And that's
how I think as well. Or you're getting something else on top of him, maybe. You just don't know. I mean, you don't know though. I mean, maybe they just decide they're not as in on him, and they don't mind having Bogey, or perhaps for 1 year like that. That might appeal to them if he were to opt out. So they like those types of players in Utah. Like it wouldn't surprise me if they ended up on him. But
that's a very funny reference. I love that. We'll just move right along from that reference. But yes, no.
But. Yeah, I think that Crowder is definitely the guy that makes the most sense. Another thing that you could look at is maybe there's some sort of outlines for a deal with Brooklyn. Maybe they could get back a Royce O'Neal. That's another guy that I'd be interested in at the right price. A versatile
that was my last thing I was going to ask you was about the Nets, because the Nets are seemingly still in. I'm not sure they're buying or selling. They're just seemingly still in activity mode post Kyrie trade. And the Hawks, they've had interest in Collins in the past. I'm not sure if they're going to still have interest in Collins. One thing I will say though is that all of the Collins for Ben Simmons fake trades,
that's over.
No, thank you.
Yeah, that's 2 years ago. That's not happening now.
No longer a thing. So if you were to do a Collins fake trade to Brooklyn, it gets a little bit challenging just because they're going to still have Ben Simmons on their team. So they're going to have Ben Simmons and Nick Claxton, and then they're going to trade for John Collins. It's an interesting decision. Maybe they would just do it anyway, but that's why I haven't floated too much of those in recent days. But yeah, Royce O'Neal, if he's available now that they have DFS, would be very interesting, because Royce O'Neal, he's not a great defender, is a perfectly fine defender, and he'll shoot it and he's fine.
He can defend a lot of positions. That's one of the things with him. He's not necessarily great at any defensive role, but he is very versatile. And he's also having a career shooting year. I think he's shooting 40% from 3. So that's a situation where you're not losing a ton of shooting if you were to send out, Bogdanovic and that sort of deal. So Crowder and O'Neal are natural guys that I would kind of look for if you did that kind of trade. Otherwise, it's hard to find something that really makes sense. Where you're not taking a huge step back in shooting, or a team that has an incentive to trade for Bogdan. It's harder to find that. It'd be more likely if they were to be just a pure seller, and dump him on a contender for some light assets. That's really it though,
Yeah, I almost spent the 10 minutes with you on this show about the hypothetical where the Hawks sell and decide to retool on the fly. And I think it's just not likely at all. So it's not even worth talking about. Like there is,
Not
I can
with
make an
the
argument
recent
for you.
play, right?
Yeah, I can make an argument for you. Like if the Hawks had continued their swoon and maybe lost all 5 on this road trip or something like that, maybe it could have been more practical. But I don't see it. I don't see that happening. So, and also I will say this: knowing what I know about Trey, I don't think that Trey and DeJounte would really appreciate a retooling or selling in the middle of the season. They wouldn't like that very much. I don't think either.
Yeah, it doesn't seem likely, but I mean, that's really the other scenario where you could look at for Bogey. Let's trade him for the number 27 pick in the draft, and think about next year. Otherwise,
honestly,
it's hard to.
I wouldn't mind that. I wouldn't mind that at all, to be honest. Now,
no, I mean it's fine
in the Hawks front office, but I think practically, just to put a bow on this whole conversation, we agree the Hawks are still capable of winning a playoff series this year. I think that's still on the table. Are they capable of making the finals? I kind of don't think so. So it kind of depends on what's your appetite? What do you value? Like how much value do you put on a potential to win a first round series versus whatever else? And like how much value is an extra first round pick going to be worth to you? The Hawks have their own pick this year. So they have another influx of talent coming, hopefully, and all that stuff. So back and forth. But I think, we're on the same page here. I don't think the Hawks are likely to do that. It's more like a hold steady or a small buy with a Justin Holiday contract / trade, or maybe a bigger move with John or Bogey. But I'm not in the prediction place yet. I think it's going to be one of those 3 things, but I have no idea which one, to be honest with you, Andrew.
Right. Yeah. Selling Bogey for a first round pick, like a real first round pick, makes a lot of sense for a big picture standpoint. I just don't think they're going to do that.
I agree wholeheartedly. Anything else you wanted to get off your chest before we get out of here? It's going to be very busy, and as soon as we're done recording, I have to post this podcast as fast as possible because it's stuff's happening in the league right now. Obviously, the Kyrie domino fell, so if you're listening to this podcast, just know that we recorded it between 8 and 9 p.m. Eastern time on Monday. But Andrew, anything else you want to share?
Well, I've been looking at specific Collins deals, and it really is kind of like a challenge to find anything. Like if you could get a Joe Harris, Royce O'Neal type package for Collins, that can maybe be interesting. Or, we talked about Eric Gordon offline. If you could get like an Eric Gordon he's guaranteed for $0 in the offseason. So when you're a team that's up against the luxury like that, you could have interest if you didn't like what you saw from him, or you wanted to make the team cheaper, that could have value, and you get back maybe like a first round pick or a KJ Martin or someone like that, the deal. Maybe that's an option for Collins. But, I tried to look at specific trade packages, and you really can't find too many that make you. I don't think you can really find any at all, honestly.
It's really hard.
Unless you're getting like 2 quality rotation players, like you're not getting worse in that sort of deal. But it really is hard to find something at the deadline, which just further and further lends itself to them just waiting to the offseason. And I think that's what's going to end up transpiring.
Yeah, I'm the same way. We've been talking a lot offline amongst our Peachtree Hoops crew and Hawks people around. It's like if there was a deal that I liked, I would talk about it. I haven't been able to find one. Look, it might exist. Maybe this front office will find something that we don't see. Maybe they'll innovate a little bit and go a little bit big picture. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's worth monitoring. And I think we agree from what we said earlier. Like I think the most likely transaction would be just turning Justin into another guy. And it's kind of a small stakes move, either Justin Holiday in a second round pick or Justin Holiday in a first round pick or something like that for a player. I would be judicious personally on first round picks, but maybe Justin 2 seconds, something like that for an upgrade would be useful as kind of a bridge between this year and next year to kind of make your team better now without killing your future. But we'll see. That's what I'll say. Andrew, thank you for joining me on the podcast today, my friend. Where can people find your stuff? I know you are much less of a volume tweeter than I am, but you still are on social media and places. So where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me Kelly on Twitter, ANDLANKELL. Enjoy the interactions there. If you ever have a question or anything, feel free to shoot me a DM as well if you prefer to talk there. I enjoy it. I like Hawks fans, and it's been much more fun to watch the team recently.
Yeah, they're playing fairly well, and we'll see if they can pick up a win on Tuesday in New Orleans. Thank you for doing this, Andrew. I appreciate it. Everybody should be checking out Andrew's work. He is very, very smart about all things Hawks, NBA, cap stuff, and worth a follow on the Twitter machine for sure. As for everybody else, please subscribe to this podcast on your podcast platform of choice, Apple, Spotify, etc. Follow me on Twitter if you want to at BT Rowland. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Hawks, and we'll see y'all after the game on Tuesday.